You can't keep doing this every day for 20 or 30 years if you don't love it. It's impossible. You do have to have some feeling of joy, otherwise what's the point, you know? Oh,
Yo, we're back with another episode of Walkie Talkie. Today we have a living legend in Matt Weber.
Yeah, well, thank you. You know, I've been shooting New York seriously since 1984. I started in '69 as a kid. I wish I'd kept it up. But then in the '70s, I got sort of sidelined by other silly things like writing graffiti in tunnels, getting high and all that bullshit. And I had a great time, but I put the camera down until 1984. Well, the reason I'm a photographer is because driving a taxi cab, over and over again, I say, oh my God, if only I had a camera. Under the Port Authority at night, two guys with knives like dancing like out of West Side Story, you know, and the blades are shimmering, and they didn't have to be like in focus. It's just to have the idea that you could tell these two guys were having a knife fight, but I didn't have a camera. Over and over again, I said, I gotta have a camera. And finally in 1984, after I'd been held up at gunpoint, I said, well, I'm alive still, I gotta do something with my life. I mean, cabbing is a way to make a living, but I gotta do something. So I went into competitive camera, which is right across from the garden, on 31st and 7th, and I bought an AE1 for $149. It took me a few years after I stopped driving to learn how to be a person on the street, because that's a whole different thing. In the cab, I was invisible. No one looks in the cab. So I had total cover. I could also run away with that cab and you couldn't catch me. And I think it was around the year 2000 when I finally got the hang of just 8 feet away, quiet, just getting a little more courage, because, you know, it was a whole new type of photography to be a pedestrian instead of a driver, which came in handy when 9/11 came, because at this point I was acclimated to the ways of being a street photographer on foot. That was a crazy day, which we don't have to talk about. But so now, all these years later, why do I still do it? When someone might ask the question. Well, a good example would be just 3 days ago. I've been shooting on the subway for 20-something years, but I saw something I'd never seen before. There was a kid, 4 or 5 kids, they were fighting. I didn't want to get involved with them because I'm old, I can't fight back. But then one of them pulled out a can of spray paint. So they did a couple of tags. Then one of them took out a match or a lighter and turned the can into a blowtorch. And now they're shooting flames like this, you know, at each other. And I'm like, well, I hadn't actually seen that, the blowtorch thing. So I started taking photos. So that's the point, is that even after almost 40 years, you leave the door, your front door of your house, and you go out there and you might see something you've never seen before, something worth photographing. You might not. A lot of times you come home with nothing. That's part of it. Everybody knows 99% of your shots aren't going to be the ones you talk about.
How do you feel people have changed in reactions from shooting in like the 80s, early 90s to like now?
That's a good question, because everybody has a phone and everybody's doing selfies and taking pictures of each other. For instance, it's no more obvious than when you go to Coney Island. In like, say, '03, before the smartphones, people are like, yo, man, I know you didn't take my picture. Yo, man, you didn't photograph my mother. And now, they don't care, because everybody's photographing everybody. Everybody's posing in the surf. Everyone's doing selfies. And so I'm walking around and nobody cares. The camera's no longer so scary. But 20 years ago, it was like, either it was like, oh, that's an honor. Yo, come here, he's taking a picture. Or it was like, yo, you know, it was either great or it was terrible, but it was an issue. Now it's nothing, you know. So that's kind of, you know, good in a way.
You want to get walking?
Yeah, we'll walk. I mean,
yeah,
it's your world. You know how to do this. I'm just happy.
How many miles do you walk, and like how many days a week?
I love to do 10, but I do it occasionally, but I'd say more 5 to 7. I know that my friend John Waugh says he does 14. That's incredible. Well, you know, it's weird how incredibly popular street photography has become, because obviously 20, 25 years ago, there were street photographers, but there was like maybe 5% as many. There were just a few, you know? And I know that because I'm walking around and now everywhere I see people. So I used to pass the famous photographer Jeff Mermelstein. We used to pass each other on Broadway. And I didn't know he was famous or anything, but one day a little kid who was with him said, well, that's Jeff Mermelstein, and he's famous. I was like, oh, really? And for like years, we would just walk by each other, you know, and smiled and like, you know, nodded, but never had a conversation. And so he was like the only other street photographer I even was aware of 25 years ago. Now, you know, you go to Washington Square Park and there's 40 or 50 photographers photographing 15 kids on skateboards. There's like 3 photographers for every subject. It's insane, but you know.
Do you feel like that's it's an overall positive thing? Or
yeah, it is what it is. I think some of the people, see, the problem is you shoot for 3 or 4 weeks and all of a sudden you have a bunch of photos and, you know, they're all good technically. And maybe a couple are interesting, but you start thinking that you're pretty good at this, and then maybe 6 months later you're like, maybe I should get an exhibit or a book, and you really haven't put that much into it, you know? And most people, every time they see an interesting person, like with interesting clothes, interesting get up, hair, whatever, they take a picture of it. And then, of course, if something interesting is happening, they take that picture too. But everyone is basically kind of doing the same thing. And that's because it is kind of like the same thing, you know? It's hard to stand out with your own totally unique style. It's not impossible, but it's kind of difficult. Look at the Cafe Wa. Not that I need a picture of it, but You know, my brother played there in '91. I was always outside in my cab waiting to make a $3 ride, and I wish I'd actually gone in more. And it was kind of a pity that my whole 20s were spent thinking primarily about money until when I was 26, I bought the camera. And all of a sudden I was looking for the next shot more than the next dollar, and that changed my life because I think when you only care about money, quite often it ends badly. Well, it's kind of hollow. I mean, you need money, no doubt about it, but when it's all you worry about is making more, I don't think it ends well unless that's all you ever want. Of course, looking back, it's that half empty, half full glass of water. There are times when I'm like, oh man, back in the 80s when I was doing a lot of my good work, I would still come home and watch a Yankee game, you know, relax, waiting for Don Mattingly's next at bat. And I'm like, man, those Yankee games, I mean, they were okay to watch, but I should have been out at night, not making more money, but taking more pictures. You know, the city was a crazy place, and I didn't know that in 5 or 6 short years, Giuliani would gentrify it to the point where it was unrecognizable. So that's why I'm glad I did the work I did. It's a lot more than I ever expected, but I still should have done more. It was lucky I went up to Harlem a lot because Harlem was still a lot of abandoned buildings, run down, and 99%. It was a neighborhood that hadn't changed that much. Now, of course, it's been gentrified, and apartments up there are $3,000-$4,000. So, yeah, but I'm glad I photographed Harlem in the 80s too. I don't know what to do with that work. I don't know if I'm gonna have trouble publishing it, as I'm a white guy and I was a cab driver, and white cab drivers were the least popular people in all of Harlem. I don't know what I'm gonna do in the few years I have left in terms of getting the Harlem work done, a book of fist fights I have, subway book, a gigantic amount of subway photos. I have like 4 or 5 books I like to do, and it's, I don't want to self-publish them. I mean, that's because it's just too much work trying to sell them. So it would be okay if I could get a way to distribute them, but I don't have any room in my house for another 2,000 copies of anything.
Are there any photo books that kind of influenced your work or your life?
Into that, sure. No, Danny Lyon, his work, it was extraordinary. He did from like 1962 through 1970 or 71. He had a run that few photographers had. He photographed the civil rights stuff down in Mississippi. Then he photographed a motorcycle gang in Chicago, the Outlaws, which he was a member of, so I got a really good inside view of the motorcycle gang. Then he went to Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, as they were clearing down the buildings to make way for the World Trade Center. He photographed all these buildings that are long gone. Then after the destruction of Lower Manhattan, which is what that book was called, he goes on to, I think, somewhere in Texas and photographs inside a prison. He gets allowed in to walk around a prison in Texas and does extraordinary work inside a jail. So Cartier-Bresson, people say, oh, pretty photos, but man, he got captured by the Nazis twice, and he escaped prison of war camp twice. His composition, his photos, his moments were incredible. Starting around 1931, he just did some amazing work. Then there's the famous Winogrand that everyone knows because...
Is there a book by Winogrand that stands out to you?
Oh yeah, well the one called Figments from the New World, which Schakowsky, who is still alive, did in 1988. That's a great big fat book and does his whole career really good justice. 1964 is an expensive book that everyone wants because it shows 1 year, and he was on fire in '64. But Figments of the New World is just his whole career. It's a great book, you know.
So in terms of your own photographs, are there like 3 to 5 of your photographs that you feel like really tells like who you are as a photographer?
Well, that's a really good question because I always think, can I put together my top 10 or my top 100 or my top 50 the groups? It would be an interesting challenge, but I've never done that. I don't know, I have 1 or 2 pictures that might be my very top 2, but then 3, 4, 5, it would be a challenge. Well, the 9/11 shot of a little boy playing around while the building's burning, a lot of people like that shot. And then, of course, the Times Square sailors were good, and the Marine, who was just standing there looking at the porn theater at like 2 in the morning, he's pondering, should I go in there? And even though he's a tough guy and he's a Marine, he's alone in New York City. Porn theater is a weird place, and it's going through his head. I still know I'm going to see a few things I haven't seen yet. In your case, there'd be a lot of things you haven't seen before or photographed before, and I don't know at what point the stuff is going to become old for you, and when you're going to think like, I got to do something new, and I don't know. There's some young photographers who are doing very good work, so I'm not worried about the future of street photography. There's so many, but there's also a handful that are standing out. Your work is always good. It's like, it seems like there are too many people doing it, but there are not too many people doing great work. There's too many people doing average work. So
somebody wants to get into street photography, brand new, and just starting to get into it. What advice would you give them?
I don't know. I mean, the thing is, I don't want to be like a cranky old guy who says you shouldn't do it, because there's always going to be things to photograph. But why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you honestly love looking at it and it's the thing that you feel you've got to do? Or is it because I got to do something, and I want to also I want my likes, I want Instagram, I want to be seen, I want to be known on social media. I mean, is it an urge to be quasi-famous, or is it actually street photography that in itself that just blows your mind? I want to do it, I have to do it, you know? There are a lot of people who will do it for a year or two and then go back to corporate America and then have a family, and it'll just have been a small period in their life as they, grew up. Other people, once they get into it, will never stop. And all you really hope for is to be in the conversation. That's the best you can hope for. If I see even the slightest impulse to take a photo, I just follow it. Because as I've said many times, when you're looking at the images, sometimes you see something that seems so over the top you have to take the picture. And yet, when you look at the photo, it's so obvious that it's not really a great photo. I'm just saying maybe it's like a woman with this and a little dog with that and the matching clothes, or and you realize it's nothing. Then there's another image where, I don't really think I should, what the hell, I'll take a picture. And it turns out to be the best picture you took all day, even though you barely felt like taking the picture. And you had the smallest impulse, but you got the biggest result. So that's the thing, you might as well, especially if you're shooting digital, you might as well take all the pictures that you think you should take, just take them.
So after doing this for so long, is there any obstacles or anything you're trying to overcome in your photography?
Not really. I think this camera does good enough. I don't care about more megapixels or anything technical. I'm happy with the results I get. And there's also the thing, where do you park your archive? I have a pile of 16 by 20 silver prints that would be like 15 feet tall, and I put like 25 years into printing them, and a lot of money too. And I'm like, now what do? Do I just give it to someone? I don't know if I can get lucky and get them into an important institution, but I do want to get them somewhere. That's what every photographer deals with towards the end, is where their archive goes. We'll think about it in 20 years or 30 years, I'm sure. But if it's a digital archive, it can all be put on one small drive, so.
How important is the sharing process in photography?
I love sharing my work with people. I like to share my work with everybody. So, anyway, I think the community of street photographer, even though it is competitive, is in general, people, they like to share. And I think the best of the lot of you guys probably love it enough that you'll keep going for 20 or 30 years. And that's good. But there's so many people that will fall by the wayside, I know that. You can't keep doing this every day for 20 or 30 years if you don't love it. It's impossible. And like I said, I'm old, get on the subway and I see something I've never seen or even thought about. This kid with the blowtorch. So it's like, wow, I don't know what I'm going to see today. I'll probably be nothing. Most days you don't see anything, but you still keep it. It's like fishing. Everyone says it's like fishing, and every now and then you catch a whopper. So this book, like I said, it's already 19 years old. I can't believe how time flies. This couple was like Ukrainian couple, Christmas 1988. I came back the next day and tried to give them money. They were unaware of it. They yelled at me. They did not want my $10. They were like, very proud. Let's see what we got around here. Cat. I had these guys in my backyard. They were cool. This one here, Perfect 10. I'm photographing the girl, obviously, with the hula hoop, busted hula hoop, and I didn't notice the old woman. The Perfect 10, though, was great. And the Bubble Boy. There were more kids playing in the street. That's what it was. Here, these shots. I might have taken these shots 20 minutes apart, but these two photographs are photographs that people like. I like these three guys, and they're like, what the fuck? This place was on Bleecker, it was nearby. So let's see, where I'm looking for. Okay. Sinking Christ. This is a knockout. I couldn't ask for a better punch, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. Bang. Turns out the skinny guy here was a bouncer. He wasn't a giant bouncer, he was a skinny bouncer. This one helped me a lot, okay? Because I had been on a run where for like a whole year I hadn't taken any shots I liked. And when this one came out of the tray in the darkroom, and I saw her face there, I was like, wow. It's not an important photograph, but it was one that made me happy. I remember at the time feeling good. This is what I'm trying to do, take a photo that makes me feel good. Here is the shot I was telling you about. We left it alone because a lot of people kind of, a nice day in the park. She looks like she's handling food or a diaper or something. She's got a young daughter and here's a young son. And it's just a nice day in the park, except that the second tower is burning and is about to come down. Maybe like 5 minutes later, it came down. And this was on my stoop. And I kind of love this picture of the couple. I kind of see it as him giving her a little kiss, and she's like madly in love. You can tell she's totally in love, and he's sort of just giving her a little peck on the cheek. But nonetheless, I knew right then and there that I was not going to get a better, it's the space between the two faces. I wasn't going to get a better kissing shot. So,
doing this for a long time, there's got to be moments of feeling self-doubt, feeling like you want to quit.
Well, not too often, but yes. Back in '95, I'd had a bad year, and then when I got that picture of the old woman in the Starbucks, that made me feel good. But basically, I'd say I don't expect much. By keeping your expectations low, you don't get disappointed. And then when something good happens, you're like, wow, it's rather than coming out, I know I'm going to kick ass, I'm going to get 2 or 3 great shots today. The odds of that happening are so far. Why even pump yourself up? Just roll with the punches, see what happens. And if you do get a great shot, the sad thing is when I take a really good shot, it probably only makes me feel better for 2 or 3 days because it just goes away. And but I still don't care. You know, even if I take a good shot, it might not be a great shot, but a good shot can sometimes work out in a book or a project you're doing because it might just complement another photograph side by side. Can't expect every shot to be an incredible shot, but some of your good shots will find use in books or exhibits or online. You do a sequence of 10, and you know about sequencing 10 photos together. You do it all the time, so it's like not all 10 are equal, but they sometimes work together. So expectations shouldn't stop you from doing it. You know, like, man, I've been sucking lately. I haven't really taken any great shots lately. Well, come on, that's part of the game. Now if you don't take any good shots for a year and you start feeling bad, well, that's another thing. That's difficult, but that's not going to happen to you because you take a lot of photos. You're going to get some good ones. I'm not going to dissuade anybody from doing this, but you do have to have some feeling of joy. Otherwise, what's the point? People say, should I become a photographer? That's a crazy question because the odds are against you making a lot of money, and it's how much do you enjoy it? And if you can't pay your bills, then right off the bat, you know what I mean? If you can't pay your rent, then it's not a great idea.
We're doing something special for this walkie-talkie. We're giving away a copy of Matt's book. He's gonna sign it. If you leave a comment on this video and go follow Matt, you're in the giveaway. We'll randomly draw a person who comments on this video and who follows Matt in 10 days after this video gets posted. All right, thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Everybody go show Matt some love.
Yeah, man, thank you very, very much.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Now when they see us in the streets, all they wanna do is take pics, and I'm like, okay.